welcome everybody watching on YouTube. Hopefully we get some fun games and some nice opening lessons in particular. Okay, so what you see in front of you is our blitz rating, 1636. In rapid chess, I think we're a little bit lower than that. So let's follow our tradition, start with a 10-minute game, and go from there. Olga Nick C from Ukraine, good luck. No, we are 1636. Wow, I've actually lost track of how quickly we climb through the ranks. So let's play c5. And we face the... Chess.com calls this the McDonald attack, but Chess.com, I think, partially just like makes up the names of openings. Like earlier today, I think I faced the Caro-Kann variation of the monkey paw defense of like Morphy's left pinky fingers gambit declined. I kind of know this informally as the Accelerated Grand Prix. And the reason it's accelerated is because in the standard Grand Prix, white starts with knight c3. And there's a reason behind every move order. There is a reason that certain moves are played in a certain order. And as I've talked about many times in previous speedruns, that reason is the move d5, which is, by and large, I would say a refutation of the move f4. Not in the sense that black is winning, like obviously not, but in the sense that it completely takes the sting out of the system. So if you know d5, you don't have anything to fear from the early f4. And e5 already puts white firmly in like slightly worse territory. So the point is that this gets essentially a French structure if we play e6. But nobody in their right mind should be tempted to play e6 here because we have this golden opportunity to get the ideal French structure with the bishop outside the pawn chain. But even better than the move bishop f5 is to start with knight c6. So this is the most flexible developing move. And the point is very concrete. Yeah, we're waiting for knight f3. And now, in addition to the standard bishop f5, we have an even better method of development. We can actually deploy the bishop to g4, which might actually strike you as far less natural because, like, aren't we running into h3? And the point is actually in this kind of closed center position, it is a good idea to exchange the bishop for the knight. That queen on f3 is going to be very vulnerable. And actually the move h3 is a very seriously weakening move. It may not seem that way, but it is. Okay, so now we follow up with e6. Now it should be obvious to you why h3 is bad. And our opponent plays it at the worst possible moment. So I've basically given away both of the components of the correct sequence. Like, obviously, we don't drop our bishop back here. That would walk into g4. We take on f3. And because we've sneaked in the move e6, this is absolutely devastating. Total collapse here. And so a seemingly insignificant weakening turns out to, like, cost white the entire center. Okay, this is not getting any better. Queen takes d4. Obviously, this was a discovery. And now we can take a third pawn. And there's no reason not to. We can take it with the queen. We can take it with the knight. Our queen is absolutely in no danger. This is something that I do notice sometimes from newer players. They get really, really scared that their queen is going to get trapped, like in the center. And it's good to have queen-related paranoia because, like, your queen is the most valuable piece. But it's very, very rare. It's exceedingly rare for the queen to get, like, actually fully trapped in the center of the board. And as long as you have charted out specific evacuation routes, and there's more than one of them, most, like, 99 times out of 100, you'll be totally safe. So here, actually, we have a vast choice of retreating squares. We can even play queen f4. But why would we walk into a discovery? Queen d3 check might be the most obvious move to you, but then the bishop blocks, bishop e2. And one thing you always have to watch out for anytime you have a situation where, well, particularly when white has played the move c3, is, like, there is the possibility of a nasty check on a4. So, like, when you're not very well developed on the king side, these checks on the a4, e8 diagonal can cost you. So I like queen h4, preventing queen a4 check and maintaining our massive material advantage. Now it's basically mop-up duty. We can just simplify a little bit, take on f3. And, of course, finally, it's time to develop the rest of our pieces. Let's just go knight f6. Okay, well, white is just, like, in tilt mode here. Bishop takes c5. Now we're a piece up. Piece and 2 pawns up. Very nice. Yeah, that was a fast one. Just a moment. Now, I'm not going to rehash, like, and I've been saying this quite a bit in this speedrun in particular, like, we are facing a lot of openings for the, like, 5th or 6th time, and I'm not going to, like, keep rehashing. So your job is, like, to do the grunt work of finding previous speedrun games with the same opening, because the knowledge builds off of each other. So here I'm just going to focus exclusively on e5. Obviously, e takes d5, knight f6 is its own theory, and you should know that pretty well. So after knight c6, there's just like 1 or 2 lines that you should know. If I look at the database here, the most popular move is knight f3. It's by far the most popular move, and bishop to g4 is black's best response, along with bishop f5. And here again, bishop e2 is white's most common response. According to the computer, white should develop the bishop to b5. But I would not be surprised if on Lichess, in the Lichess database, for instance, I can check right now, but I'm too lazy. I wouldn't be surprised if h3 was more common online. So if white plays h3, you play bishop takes f3, queen takes f3. And actually, this is not normally a good idea. So like, for example, let me think of an example where this type of move is not a good idea. So for instance, okay, let's say this, e4, c5, like knight c3, knight c6, queen f3. Like here, the move knight to d4 is very, very tempting, but the queen can just drop back to d1, and the knight is eventually going to be smoked out of this square. So it's not like, it's neither good nor bad. So oftentimes, like jumping into the center like this can be kind of hasty. This is an exception. Here, you actually want to play the move knight to d4. And the reason for that is you want to chase the queen back to its initial square so that then after e6, you're actually threatening checkmate. And this is the whole point. If you start with e6 instead, then queen h4 is not an effective threat because white can cover with g3 or even queen f2. So you want to force the queen back, then play e6. And you're forcing white to play this incredibly weakening move g3. Incredibly weakening move. Wow, c3 was played once in the Cuban Correspondence Championship of 1997. Some guy named Luis Rodriguez Lamarche lost to Jorge Raul Lopez. Cuban correspondence. Missing this by correspondence would be a different kind of pain. Yeah, I think Lamarche Rodriguez's correspondence career ended after this game. But the only move is g3. And you don't stop there. I mean, if you just look at white's pawn chain, white has no pieces developed. This is a clear sign that you have to strike while the iron is hot. So what does that mean in the context of this position? You should pause the video and figure out a very powerful undermining move, which it may seem kind of extreme to play this move, but it really shouldn't given white's lack of development. So what should you do? g5, yeah. g5. Just blasting through the pawn chain. And, you know, white's probably going to play c3. And now you can just drop the knight back to c6. Once you play gf, white's pawn center is going to be on the verge of collapse. If white plays the move d2, d4, then, I mean, the French players among you should be, like, your hand should be automatically playing this move, queen to b6. And white's lack of development costs him because you can't play bishop e3. So this is just one very important line to know. The only other thing I'll mention is bishop b5 can be very effectively met with queen b6. The idea being you're hitting the bishop and you're preparing to recapture the queen so that your pawn structure on the queen side remains intact. Bishop e2, e6 was the game continuation, and I mean, h3 loses the game. h3 literally loses the game. So let me just double check. The main line here is short castles. This is the most popular move. And here you have this very typical move, h5. This is the last thing I'll mention in this game. h5 is a prophylactic move because now if white plays h3, you have full control of basically all of the kingside squares. Takes, and the simplest move here is h4. The simplest move is h4, but the computer move is actually knight h6, which is quite a move because you're actually sacrificing the pawn on h5. And now the idea is to just launch a massive attack against white's king with queen h4. White has to waste a tempo dropping the bishop back, otherwise it's going to get massacred. And now the knight gets into g3. I mean, this should be pretty obvious that black has overwhelming compensation. White is almost lost. Just absolute disaster. So this line is just no good. And of course, you can see the importance of weak squares, like how quickly it translates into catastrophe in this game. Any questions? Yeah, if you're looking for an anti-Sicilian weapon, Grand Prix Attack is great. The McDonald attack or whatever, not great. Don't play f4. Let's do one more 10-minute game. Okay, white against Cam Trujillo. Let's go e4. Great. So we get to play a fantasy variation, which has not been my only recommendation against the Caro. I think I've also been advocating for e takes d5, but I kind of missed the fantasy, so let's do it. I feel like a lot of people have been demonstrating pretty good theoretical knowledge in the fantasy, but not yet. I think when you hit like 2,000, 2,100, people start showing pretty good knowledge. At this level, the fantasy is still like forced win for white. So c5 is, it tells me that our opponent is like aware of the general concepts, but isn't aware of the right execution. c5 is not the right way to strike at the center. The main move here for black, of course, is e5, to which we respond knight f3, and that is its own theory. c5 is like a Benoni, but like much worse than a regular Benoni, down several tempi. Of course, our response is d5. So black is trying to play this kind of Benoni style, but because he's lacking in development, if we play this carefully, we can put black in very, very serious trouble. We also can play... we also can get into serious trouble ourselves if we are not careful. Now, because our f-pawn is gone, right, we have to look at this position through a very specific lens. We have to remember that the f-pawn is gone. That bears consequences, and so queen h4 check is always in play in these situations. A similar opening where this is a thing is the four knights Alekhine. Like if white plays the four knights Alekhine, as I'll show you after the game, you always have to watch out for a check on h4, just like last game. So we don't actually need to play c4, which I assume is probably a lot of people's instinct response, because black is not like attacking this pawn. Yeah, just knight f3. And in general, our biggest advantage here as white, it's not the fact that we have a pawn on d5. Okay, this pawn is nice. It's our development advantage, right? Our biggest asset here is our development advantage. And the reason that the pawn on d5 is a strength is because it can be used, in many cases, in combination with a rook check on e1. It can advance to d6. So we're trying to win this game in like the next 5 moves. When I frame it like that, the next move should be really obvious to you. We need to develop as actively and as efficiently as possible. So we check on b5. And now we have a very clear goal to put something on e1. Rook, queen. If we give a check on e1 and black is not prepared for it, the game ends immediately. c4. So black is like oblivious to the danger here. Yeah, that's it. The game is over. I mean, rook e1 check. What's the catch? But there's still a little bit of finesse left to demonstrate here. It's not totally over after bishop e7. We have to be a little bit careful. So when black played the move c4, obviously he had an intention. The intention should be clear to you. The intention is to give a check on b6. This is a fork. So the other observation we should be making here is that our knight is pinned. So like mental note, like do not accidentally consider a move like knight d4. So if we play d6, black gives a check on b6. And let's set that aside, because clearly things get messy there. We have to calculate. Actually, do we have to calculate? No, I think we just have a winning move. Never mind. Now that I actually look at that position for a couple moments, I immediately see that we just have a move which ends the game. The reason I saw that move is because the bishop on g4 is unprotected, right? And as I've like said again and again and again, undefended pieces are like the material out of which combinations are often made. So there's like one subtlety here that's like genuinely advanced, but after d6, queen b6 check, everybody should be like, even after a couple moments, should spot like a badass move that essentially solidifies the material advantage. And that's the move queen d1 to d4. And there's a lot to keep track of there, right? But in reality, it's not a lot to keep track of. Black has essentially 2 possible moves there. If black takes the bishop, we do not play d takes e7. We actually take the bishop on g4. Because the bishop on e7 is pinned, it's not going anywhere. If in that position the black queen comes back to deliver a check on c5 or b6, trying to pick off the d6 pawn, our queen then slides back to d4 with the same concept. Okay, and if the queens get traded, nothing changes. Black will ultimately end up losing this bishop. So you should just like replay that line in your head until you can clearly visualize it. Alternatively, after d6, queen b6, queen d4, if black trades queens, again, nothing changes. Black loses a piece. And lastly, if after queen d4, black plays bishop takes f3, of course, we will first need to trade queens. Then we need to recapture the bishop on f3, and then the bishop on e7 will be lost. I deliberately omitted a move which I was not expecting from our opponent, and indeed he didn't play it, and that's bishop takes f3. And some of you, particularly the more advanced players, you might be actually wondering, like, what if black first takes the knight, which is a very ingenious move order swap. And there I think we need to demonstrate some accuracy. So I'll save that for after the game. Okay, so queen b6 check, queen to d4. Let's carry out our scheme. Now, again, I'm not guaranteeing that I'm right. Like, I think I see a winning move after bishop takes f3, but we'll check it after the game. Queen b5, queen g4. Now, maybe we also were winning with queen takes g7 here, but I'm too lazy to calculate it. I see that this wins a full piece. I see that the black king is also toast on top of it. No need to, no need to rediscover the wheel. Practical calculation. If you see a winning continuation that's like very clearly winning, save some time. Okay, long castle, just d takes e7. It's all over. Okay, rook e7, queen c5, rook back to e3. No way, Jose. Yeah, rook to e3, rook e8. Okay, this is pretty easy to thwart. The easiest way is just to interfere with the root of the problem, which is the pin, and just couple that with what I call the weaponized queen trade. Like, we're up 2 pieces. Like, the queen trade is now used as a very powerful weapon to win a tempo, immediately repelling the initiative. I wouldn't be surprised if black resigned here. Yeah. Pretty straightforward stuff. Okay, he does trade. Let's mop this up pretty quickly. Okay, here's another piece. Okay, now black resigns. GG. I don't think we ever faced the move c5 in all our fantasy experience. Just a moment. I don't think I ever actually faced this move c5. I see that it's been played a few times in the database. Actually, Gleck has a game here with the white pieces, and he's following me around. Yeah, after d5, black is almost lost. So I remind you that after e5, our move is knight f3, and much like in the game, we don't want to like play d takes e5 because it allows this devastating check on h4. The most famous, incidence of this move, queen h4, queen h5, is in the Damiano. Like, anytime the f pawn is pushed, and particularly when it is gone, you have to be very careful about the conjunction of like a check on h5 with a potential fork against the rook. I mentioned the Alekhine, same concept. In the 4 pawns Alekhine, if you're not careful, and if you just sort of stumble into this, one of black's old lines is c5, d5, and then e6. And a lot of people just automatically go d6, and then they run into this nasty little check, and you get the sort of Damiano trope with queen e4. Okay, so the move here is actually knight to c3, because here this takes the sting out of queen h4 because it covers the e4 square. It's not the check itself that's dangerous, it's often the follow-up. Same thing goes for the fantasy. After e5, knight f3. As I've mentioned many times, the old move is e takes d4. This is a very serious mistake. Who can tell me why? Who can remind me why e takes d4 is essentially discredited? Despite being the most popular move online, and one of the most appealing things about the fantasy is that you're going to get this a lot. Let's see who can remember the move. Yeah, bishop c4. In the fantasy, you are putting all of your eggs in one basket. That's the development basket. Like, development is everything in the fantasy. And after bishop c4, black is like... I'm not going to say black is lost, but practically speaking, black is almost lost. According to the computer, it's like +1 with impossible defense. If black plays the most popular move, which is bishop to e6, it's lost. Takes, and here again, right? If you're seeing this for the first time, you might be like inclined to recapture on d4. No. Castles. Development. F-file. Right? You have like 3 or 4 moves until black castles, and you need to use those moves to develop the initiative. If black plays bishop e7, then you take on d4. But you're not taking this to restore material equality. You're doing this in order to develop an attack on e6. This is what it means to play in the spirit of the line. Same thing goes for what we faced. c5, d5, e6, knight f3, of course, stopping queen h4 and developing takes, and bishop to g4. So what I'll mention here is that I want to just follow up on the point I made during the game, which is it's not the structure itself that is giving white the advantage, right? Because this structure where you have a pawn on d5 that's surrounded by kind of a black pawn on c5 and potentially a bishop on d6, this structure itself is not uncommon. For example, in the Nimzo-Indian, there is a line that is quite fashionable in the same-ish variation. All right, no, this is the Kmach variation, apparently. I think a3 is the same-ish. Where black plays d5, a3, bishop goes, let's see, back to d6. Or actually, wait, bishop e7, e4, takes, c5. This is one of black's most popular and most tested variations. And you get exactly the same structure. Like short castles, Fabiano had this in a game in the Canadas. He was white. Kirilo Aleksenko is black. Black does fine here, right? But this is because black is already castled, and then the bishop parks itself on d6. This is the concept of a blockade. This is probably what black should have done. This is probably what black should have done, and probably would have given black more chances to survive, get the king side out as quickly as possible. After bishop d6, we would have probably gone knight c3. And if black goes knight to e7, which I think is the most likely. Oh, sorry. If black goes knight e7, then bishop to d3, aiming at the h7 pawn. If black castles kingside, we castle kingside as well. The knight is jumping to e4, and white's activity is absolutely overwhelming here. Very good idea to just analyze this position on your own and understand why this is so much better compared to what I just showed you in the Nimzo-Indian. The reason is just the development. Like, white is just so much better developed here. For instance, in this position, knight g5, the knight is hanging, queen is coming to h5. Completely devastating. So you get the point. Bishop g4 loses the game. Just this basically eliminates any last chances that black had. And the last thing I'll mention, c4 is a very ingenious resource. But I want to mention what my intended response was to bishop takes f3. So who can tell me, who has any ideas here as to any inkling of thought as to what my idea could have been? This position. Wow. I just checked with the computer, and indeed, my move is winning. Yeah, so there's basically two winning options. My idea was to play queen to d4. It was to play queen to d4 anyway, which of course is our response to queen b6. It's also queen d4. The point is that everything is hanging, right? This attacks g7, e7 is hanging, and f3 is hanging. Black has three hanging pieces, so black has no moves. Because if the bishop moves from f3, let's say it moves to h5, you can just play de, knight e7, queen takes g7. That's it. The game is over. If rook g8, then queen takes g8 is literally checkmate. If rook f8, I'm sure there's like multiple ways to win, but even just bishop g5, black is getting just massacred in this position. So probably black should go to c6 to eliminate at least this pin. But it's essentially the same concept, right? Like you play de. Actually, wait a second. Bishop c6. If bishop c6, you want to play bishop c6, sorry, bc and queen takes g7, of course, first. Because if you play de first, who can tell me what is the difference? Like, why can't you take here? And I would actually add that the same goes probably for bishop h... No, the same does not go for bishop h5. Here, after queen b6, you have checkmate. Here you have checkmate. So that's the difference. If black plays bishop c6 first to eliminate white's bishop, you want to play queen takes g7. And white wins the game. The rook is trapped. The computer indicates there's a beautiful second win, which starts with the move, sorry, not gf, but bishop takes d7 check, queen takes d7, and now gf. Obviously, not queen takes f3 because d6 pawn falls. The reason I didn't want to go for this is because of long castle. I thought that long castles completely bust this idea. But white has an absolutely beautiful winning concept. Good opportunity for the advanced viewers to practice your tactical skills. It's winning for white. It's winning for white. I'll give you a second to think about it, but it's really hard to spot. It's not queen d4. I mean, remember that white has no development. So, like, what are you trying to do here? Like, even if I play queen takes d6, right? Black has the possibility of forcing the queen trade. You're not going to, like, don't fool yourself. You're not going to win anything with just the queen. White is losing. So the move is d takes e7. But the question is, what if black takes your queen? Because if you take the rook, then the queen will recapture with an extra queen. If you take the queen, hoping to promote, black takes with check and then recaptures the pawn on e7. But there is a third move, and that is e8 queen. Bingo. And this is a deflection. All right, so you're promoting to a queen. You're currently up a piece. If black takes that queen, then you take black's queen, and you're up a minor piece. Otherwise, like, white is just up a piece. If black tries to desperado his queen, you desperado your queen. So it's a beautiful, like, mirror image idea. Of course, like, black can play queen takes f3, but now you drop your queen back, consolidating and repelling any last checks that black might have on g3, and white is winning. Really nice to add to your collection of tactical ideas. And finally, I'll mention that if, for instance, you're looking for a more like Russian schoolboy approach to the position, there is nothing wrong with just playing knight c3 here, which is maybe a confusing thought for some of you, but a move like knight c3 might allow you to avoid some of these complications because it protects the bishop, so it takes the sting out of this check. You can now just block with your bishop. So, you know, one good takeaway from the speedrun is, like, sometimes there is the simple option which avoids the need for calculation. And you have to find that balance. Sometimes you must calculate, otherwise you miss, like, a winning option. I believe this to be one of those instances where I just wanted to finish the game. But, you know, like, it's a judgment call that you have to make in many cases. Let's finish with one quick 5-minute game, and then we'll call it a night, guys. Okay, we're 2063, so sadly, okay, our opponent is back, struggling with the internet. Okay, d6, so we're facing a Perk/Philidor. We're facing d6 and c6, so this is, again, it depends on how black follows this up. Knight to d7. So I would call this like a Perk-Philidor cross. Like, you have some players who like to go for these setups, and typically, like, white's response is going to be the same as our response against the Philidor. And when I say the Philidor, by the way, like, I am, of course, referring to the traditional Philidor, knight f3, d6, but I'm also referring to the more modern version, which is d6, d4, knight f6, knight c3, and then e5. And the mainline response to the Philidor is just to develop your knights. The bishop is brought out to c4, and we can do exactly the same thing here. There's no need to reinvent your response to these setups, which a lot of people are very annoyed by. One good practice that I would recommend to people is to start with the move a4. It may seem very, like, weird to play this move first, but just preventing b5 as early as possible can be a good idea to limit black's options. And it appears that we've transposed actually into the mainline Philidor, where, you know, white has a million ways to kind of nurture the small advantage, but I like starting with rook e1. And at this point, again, there's like a gazillion ways to position your pieces. I was taught that, like, simplicity is a virtue, particularly when you're facing, like, second-rate setups. So let's just complete our development, bishop e3. Just completing your development. Then it's a good idea to play h3 to prevent various knight g4 shenanigans. Notice that those shenanigans become a lot more annoying after black plays h6. This is a really important observation, because if black plays it here, you have bishop g5. Once h6 happens and then black jumps to g4, you have to go back, and that can be less than desirable sometimes. Okay, now queen d2. Queen d2 should be another one of those automatic moves that you play, because coordinates the rooks and obviously hints at the potential for a sacrifice on h6. That sacrifice on h6 is very often just a death blow to a lot of these Philidor setups. But before we contemplate it, let's kind of complete our setup, rook a d1. And now it's go time. I'm not even going to calculate it. I'm just going to go for this intuitively. And you're going to see how powerful this is and how quickly this will result in victory. I have full confidence in this sack. And you should be fully aware of what we're threatening here. This is why the bishop on c4 is so powerful. We have the threat of queen takes g6, and that makes all the difference. d5. Okay, let's play e takes d5, opening up the center. And you might ask, well, why didn't I play d takes c5? Because I didn't want to give up the bishop so soon. Right, the rook on d8 is defended. First, you want to play e takes d5. Now, with the d file also open, I think d takes c5 is quite a bit more palatable. But now let's do a little calculation. Now let's try to find the checkmate. So, takes. Yeah, I got it. I'm positive this is not the best option, but I think it is a serviceable winning option. D takes c5. And now, simply e takes f6, threatening lobster pincer mate on g7. And now simple whole board awareness, right? Like this is perhaps the only other skill which is involved here, other than basic attacking mechanics. It's not to get too fixated on like this small quadrant of the board, but to understand like when the center opens up, it's not just about the rooks, right? Yeah, it's great that the rooks have the open files, but it's also about the minor pieces having access to new squares, and in this case, knight to d5 is absolutely overwhelming. Too many threats. Something is going to give here. Something is going to give. And here we have a beautiful move that I think is going to result in checkmate. And it's hard for me, if I'm honest, to tell you how exactly I see this move. It's just one of those pattern recognition things. If I had to like spell it out, I would say this. I'm already looking here for potential mating patterns. And there's two mating patterns which jump out at me immediately. One is like the knight landing on one of these two squares. In the absence of like these two minor pieces, or in the absence of the queen, then one of these moves would be checkmate. The other mating pattern is like a rook landing on the 8th rank. So if we had a way to deflect the queen, that would be awesome, because then we could take on f6 with mate. I don't see a way to do that. Rook e6, black just has queen takes e6. What about the other approach? The rook on d8 is protected by the bishop. If it was unprotected, we would have like knight e7 check, right? And then rook takes d8 mate. So is there a way to deflect the bishop? And when I say deflect the bishop, what do I mean? I mean, make a move that essentially tempts the bishop to move away from the diagonal, which often means like it has to capture a piece. That's what leads you to the move knight e5. Now, this was a pretty like laborious way of describing it. And of course, like I've left out what happens if knight takes e5. Here you have to notice that you're x-raying the bishop with your queen. But here, knight e7 check works like a charm. 3 pieces down, doesn't matter, it's checkmate. That was sexy. That was a sexy little mini Philidor attack. Boom. And it's just like so smooth the way it's made. This is why it's so bad not to coordinate your rooks. How many times have I said that? When you have a bishop that remains on its initial square, you're playing without a flank. So all of these tactics that involve back rank is going to typically work out for the side that has coordinated rooks. I'm going to run this quickly on the computer just so that I don't lie to you about how sound this was. Maybe this was unsound. Don't rule that out. I'm not going to dive into the intricacies of the opening. It's too late for that. I will mention that some people like to go like b5, I think. I've seen people do this. If black essentially like does not play e5, you can play e5 yourself. Like the way to punish black here would be to play e5 yourself. And sometimes to sack the pawn on e6. So I'll let you investigate this on your own, but remember that like black can't get away with shit like that. Black eventually does have to contest the center, and we end up transposing into a Philidor. So I'm pretty sure this is all theory. Pretty sure this is all essentially theory. Yeah, bishop e3 is actually uncommon. The move is h3. So according to what I'm seeing, the move is h3. And then if black plays h6, then you play bishop e3, transposing into the game. This actually does allow knight g4, which is an extra resource that you might as well prevent. So just as a note, you should start with h3. But okay, it didn't cost us. So in this position, rook to d8 is actually a serious mistake. Apparently, black's best move is rook to e8. The idea being that if we play queen to d2, black is supposed to play bishop f8, protecting the h6 pawn. This is what black forgot to do. The moment knight f8 happens, all hell breaks loose. So bishop, yeah, actually knight f8 is still okay. Black is still okay after bishop e6, knight g6, bishop takes h6. Let's check if the sacrifice is sound. It is not. It is not sound. It is not, in fact, sound. Wow, crazy. Huh. Wow, the losing move... Lol. The losing move is actually all the way... Crazy, crazy. So the losing move, let me just fast forward very quickly, is d takes c4. All the way up until this moment, black is still okay. Black is okay if he plays bishop to f8 intermediate move, kicking the queen away from h6. And the whole point is, if the queen moves back to g5, which is the only available square in the vicinity of the king side, this loses the game because of knight to h7 hitting the queen again. And the bishop is hanging as well. So this small little resource is the reason why after bishop f8, white has to drop all the way back to d2. Queen takes c4, e takes f6. The position remains very unclear, but black is okay. But in order to gain an advantage after bishop takes h6, black had to start with e takes d4, which is a very, very difficult thing to do because it seems like you're actually helping white. But here's the rub. After gh6, queen h6, you get this position, right? Now the move d5 is much stronger when compared to d5 in this position. Because, like, if e takes d4, knight takes d4 is already included, right, this is a much better version. If black tries to sneak this move in here, of course, it's not going to work. White's going to go d6 and take the knight. So by playing this move here, at the beginning of the sacrifice, you're forcing white to recapture because this knight is also hanging. And at the end of the line, after d5, the bishop is shut out. White does not have the same firepower in the center, and then bishop f8 is coming next to repel the attack. Like bishop d3, bishop f8, and there's always this really nasty resource, queen to f4, forcing the queen trade. So, wow. I'm honestly stunned that this is unsound, but this is a great lesson that, especially when you analyze with a computer, you begin to see that, you know, like you need to have complete and total, you need to have the patience of a saint if you really want to play objectively. The computer is giving just like bishop b3, prophylaxis. Prophylaxis, right? Stopping or like taking the tempo out of the move d5. And you just play basically like maneuvering chess here with a small advantage. But I will say that 9 times out of 10, under 2200, this type of move is going to work. And even over 2200, this kind of move is going to work. So, fun little game. It did work like a charm. And obviously, once this was allowed, knight e5 is a pretty beautiful move. Pretty happy to end like that. And yeah, just remember, knight takes e5, knight f6 check was similarly devastating. All right, guys. Keep attacking. Keep winning. Keep sacrificing, even if it's unsound. It'll work out. We're still, most of the time, playing chess with humans. Thanks for watching. I'm going to wrap up the speedrun here. Thanks for hanging out today. See you later.